think we've got most people here.
Well, I hope there's more from my team showing up.
So welcome again, everybody. Great to have you here for sort of our first substantive virtual workshop as part of the Institute. And just again, reminder, I'm Don Lafreniere, and we've got all the Institute directors here again today helping out. And what we're going to do, this is basically our agenda for the day. So Dan and I are going to do a quick, maybe we even keep it to 10 minutes, 10, 12 minutes, 15 max sort of presentation. It's really going to be kind of an overview of some of the materials that we sent you to engage with ahead of time. So we want to, we recognize everybody's busy, and we want to just take out some of the key messages and materials from that, from those materials we sent you in advance. So we'll just do a quick overview of that, as well as talk about sort of what we're doing when we get into these breakout rooms. So we're going to do that for 10, 12 minutes. We're then going to go into breakout rooms. So all 9 teams will go into rooms of your own, and you're going to work on some prompts that we've given you that you're going to use. Some of those we gave you in advance, but there's a few extras that we didn't give you on purpose. And we're going to go through those together. And then the Institute directors are going to we're each going to move in and out of these rooms with you. Okay. And we'll explain that when we get to that point of the workshop today. We're then going to come together into groups of 3. So 3 projects, that is. So 3 rooms of 3 projects to kind of share across projects. And we've got some prompts for you to think about when we get to that point. And then we'll have a quick wrap up at the end, talking about a few different next steps within the Institute itself. Okay. Just like last time, please use the Q&A function on Zoom. James is going to be moderating the Zoom today. So please put your questions in there as we go along. And we got to actually test this, James, but I think the Q&A works even when you're in your breakout rooms. So if something comes up. But again, you'll have one of us in there basically most of the time. Okay. Okay. So again, this is a short, very condensed version of some of the materials we sent you in advance. But I'm going to turn it over to Dan, who's just going to do an overview on scoping.
Thanks, Don. I guess I'll just have you advance the slides for me here. We've given you these questionnaires, and we're devoting most of the time today to the discussion, which is really what we're here for. But at the risk of being slightly repetitious, we wanted to run through a couple of overview things here that might help guide the discussion alongside the questionnaire that we sent you. And so really where one of the places where we start is actually getting the infrastructure built. But the process of building a deep map is really kind of a layered process where you're doing multiple things at the same time, because deep maps can actually be nested, projects in one infrastructure. So you're trying to build an infrastructure to support your deep map, but you're also formulating your some of your specific stories and research questions at the same time. And so we use this chart you can see on the screen here to kind of define how a deep map is structured in a broad way, particularly with a focus on data. But this also helps with the scoping process, because you're looking at these different nested levels. So there's the whole universe of data out there that you might be building a deep map from, or that is available to you. And most of it you're never going to use, because we're talking about the whole universe of data here. But in order to bound your deep map successfully and have everything in it that you need to build an infrastructure that is bounded in space and time through data sets. And that's what we're calling here the deep map prime. This is the infrastructure that includes all of the data that you're going to need. So when you're scoping, you're thinking probably a little bit bigger than the specific research questions you're asking as you build your first iteration of the deep map. but you are creating some boundaries there. And that could be based on time and space boundaries you're already thinking of. It could be due to data limitations or interests in certain types of data and what's available. So that's the data infrastructure, but also the conceptual sort of boundaries being set there. In the next level up of the pyramid, we have the deep map personal. And you can see this is where specific deep maps that answer a specific theme bounded question, like the projects you're all working on, live. So it's one level up or one level more specific than that infrastructure. Anyway, we call that deep map prime the HSDI, the historical spatial data infrastructure. Next slide. And so just going really quickly through the definitions here, once again, you're thinking of representations of space, time, architecture, lots of things. It's going to be a flexible, varied infrastructure that can support different types of data. And it has to be flexible, but also represent these things in useful ways. Next slide. And so quickly defining this, thinking in terms of what deep maps are, we're also thinking about our scoping and what our infrastructure needs to support in a practical sense. So you're trying to do quite a bit of different sorts of visualizations, being able to do some kinds of analysis, linking data together and having them interact with each other and having users interact with that mutually interactive data. It's going to be probably a multivocal and multi-local deep map that requires that the infrastructure support these differing interpretations, which might require different kinds of visualizations, different kinds of data, even to address the same theme from different perspectives. And again, another thing we like to emphasize here is the longevity and sustainability needs to be thought about from the beginning. So as you're scoping, things that are going to be particularly difficult to sustain but are important might need to take center stage in terms of where resources go. Or you may have to make some difficult choices about things that need to be left out, at least for an initial iteration. Next slide. And throwing this up here again from our first introductory talk, sometimes it helps to define things by talking about what they are not. So again, this is something that should be able to be dynamic. It shouldn't just be the story maps we're all familiar with that just tell one story with a little bit of spatial data. So this is not going to be an off-the-shelf product. It also isn't just throwing historical GIS data or GIS data out there and building some kind of interactive map with it. It's going to be deeper and more sophisticated, more interactive than that. We're definitely going to be using boundaries that encompass multiple space and multiple time definitions. So you want to build an infrastructure that's going to be broad enough to incorporate all of that. And again, sustainability. You're going to build this, it's going to live and grow. It's not going to be finished. Ideally, no deep map is ever finished. So that's something to keep in mind during the scoping stages. That flexibility is not just an aspiration, that's a real requirement for a genuine deep map. And then finally, the community collaboration is essential. So again, while you're thinking about what your infrastructure needs to be and can support, some input from the community is going to need to be there so that they can bring up some challenges in terms of what kinds of data they think needs to be there. And that might require, again, some very early stage discussion and decisions. Next slide. And I am going to hand this over to Don now to kind of talk about the Q and a time traveler as an example of a specific deep map sitting on top of that infrastructure, which hopefully will help define the relationship between the two and how they both need to be part of the scoping process.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Okay, so the Q&A time traveler is an online deep map that we've been working on here at Michigan Tech for 10 years, and really was the sort of the impetus for why we decided to put together this institute was sort of encouragement from our community and from our both our local regional community and our scholarly community to say, hey, we need to help others learn how to do these kinds of things. And so the time traveler itself was built to really connect the public with researchers and inviting them to create the past in time and space to be able to really try to meet the aims of building an actual deep map and moving us from theory to practice. And so the time traveler so far has linked people, places, environments over space and time from the 1880s or so through to the present. And so the mission of our project really is to start conversations both online and through our in-person programming about how the region's industrial past continues to affect people today. And we do that, and when we talk about our sort of audience is really broad. It's everything from our residents to visitors to our local municipal officials, and trying to get people together to understand how the past is still influencing us today in the present. Our HSDI, when we started building this in 2014, was really built to be as broad as possible, just like what Dan was talking about. It was built to be an infrastructure that will grow over time and has been able to support, cutting edge research in all of these areas. So these are sort of the areas in which we've got, publications and theses and other outputs that have come from the project, have sort of come in these general areas. And there's quite a few others. And this is just sort of the academic piece, right? So these are the research themes in which the HSDI was built here in the Keweenaw. And this is what our current HSDI looks like. So it's got about 630,000 records and growing. And like Dan said, we continue to add to this thing. Just about 20 million variables about the population and environment of the region. When we started the time traveler, if you see the slides and the other information we gave you in advance, you'll see that, we started with georeferenced historical maps and then city directory. And then we moved to the census. We captured built environment data from the maps. And then later we had subsequent projects that brought in school records and brought in employee records from the largest mining company in our region. And then in the last few years, we've added in a story submission function as well, where we're getting stories from the public about their experiences in the region or their memories. But what's really important is to understand that all of these sources are not just mapped, but they're linked across space and time. And we're going to show you a demonstration quickly on what that looks like. Okay. Key to the deep mapping process is that the scoping for the deep map always includes the community, right? And so in our model, community feedback started very early on, where we had where we got together with key stakeholders in the community. These were archivists, these were museum directors, heritage, our local heritage societies, and researchers, and said, what kind of data do you want to see in this thing, right? And what would it look like? And how would it support the kinds of questions that you have about our region? From there, we moved on to really working with the community to design the interface itself, because we wanted it to be as broadly accessible to as many demographics as we could. And which I'll tell you was one heck of an experience trying to meet the needs of seniors and teens and teachers and researchers. And I don't, today we will still say we have not met that aim, but we're trying, right? And again, these things are some things that continue to evolve, right? We did that. You can see all these pictures are kind of giving you ideas on how we did it, right? We did it at festivals. We did it in sort of organized talks. We did it at seniors' homes, at libraries, in schools, and stuff like that. Whoops. So then the piece of what we call the time traveler, right? That sort of personal deep map is the interface in which the public interacts with. And so the HSDI is the infrastructure that makes it all possible. The Keweenaw Time Traveler, the way we built the deep map, is the interface in which the general public engages with it. So we really have sort of two ways into our deep map. The Time Traveler, which I'll show you here in a second, and the HSDI itself, which is really designed for those who are used to engaging with spatial temporal data, and really the research community. Okay. So I'm going to show you by going to KeweenawHistory.com. Can everybody still see that on my screen? Okay, just moving screens around here. So this is the time traveler, and I'm just going to show you quickly a quick overview of sort of how it operates and what you can do with it. And this is our version of a deep map, right? So you arrive, you can search for people, or you can just explore the map and see what you find. And that was really important for us to both to give people an opportunity to just organically find things. But for the sake of showing you an example, I'm going to show you an example of Angelina Arco. And if you watch the videos that we sent in advance, this was an example I think Sarah ran through.
Well, it looks like we lost Don. He's should be coming back shortly. Sorry about that, everybody. This is just what happens with Zoom.
Okay. Am I here?
You're here now.
Weird. Okay. All of a sudden, I wasn't here. Okay. Hi, everybody. Okay. Can you see my screen? Technology. Okay. I think I lost internet access is actually what happened. I may not have it back. Oh, I do. But it's really slow. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You're good to go.
Okay. For some reason, my internet is just not working right. I'm wondering, Sarah, are you willing to pick this up and try this?
I could try. I'm in the same building as you, though, so I'm not certain my internet will be much better, but I can try.
Yeah, I'll try. If not me, while James do it, because he's in a different building. Go ahead.
You sound fine now. Why don't you start, and James and I will pick up if you fall out. How's that?
Yeah. Okay. All right, so I'm going to search for Angelina Arco. This is just an example that we like to use to show people sort of the power of how the deep map works. Okay, so I searched for Angelina, and on the left-hand side, I get 4 records for her. And these records tell us her, and it just gives you a quick result. It shows us her name, her age, the year that the record's from, and what geography it's referencing. And in this case, it's referencing her home address in 1918. And okay, so then it comes up with a historical map that represents where Angelina was living in 1918. And if I zoom in here, we will see a representation. This is from a Sanborn map of where she was living in Calumet in 1918. This happens to be you can see the sort of row houses here that she was living in. Okay, and if I click on her record, sorry, it's going to zoom back out for a second, and I click on it, what I will get on the left hand side is a everything's moving really slow today. Sorry about that. This pop-up is showing me everyone that's at the same location as her in the same time period. Okay. Then on the left-hand side, I get some demographic information and some location information. And this is coming from a number of sources. So if you see here where it says age, and it actually has 2 ages listed. Okay, so this is showing us that in one source, the 1920 census, she was listed as 13. In the school record in 1918, she was listed as being 10. So because the sources are linked together, we can represent information from different types of sources because often we're going to have different kinds of information. Another good example would be here looking at her first name, right? It's spelled 3 different ways in 3 different sources, okay? And all of us who work with historical sources know that this is something we wrangle with, right? And so we present the power of a deep map is being able to show the complexity of the data set, right? Which are within it. So here we have a representation of Angelina's home location in 1918. We've got some data about her here on the left-hand side. We've got some other information about her education that comes from different sources. But what we also have down here at the bottom is related content. And so if I were to click the people tab here, for example, we can see the rest of her family. We can see her classmates as relationships, and we can see people who live at the same location, which in this case includes people who are, they look like boarders, okay, who are probably living in the same address as her. We can also map any of these types of relationships. So we can just click show on map, for example, and it will show us, if I zoom out a little bit, where a number of her classmates are living, okay, in the area. We could click on any of these people and it would give us their record and it would zoom us to where they live, okay, in that same time period, okay. We can also go to places and see the different geographies that we were able to map for this particular person. So for Angelina, we have her home, obviously, but we also have her school, and we can see where her school is. And so her school is located down here, okay? And we can zoom in and see if she went to the Webster School, okay? And her home is up here, okay? We can also see related stories. So if people submit stories about either the location in which a record is located or about an individual, we can also see stories about them. And so in this case, someone submitted a story about the tenement building that she lives in. We'll just give it a second here to render. I'm wondering if this is Zoom and big data converging on my internet connection here at the same time. So thanks for your patience. There we go. Okay. And so here we have a story about the Butler Road tenement, which is the tenement house that she was living in, and someone had contributed a photo that actually the tenement building is actually this here in the background of the photo, okay? But it gives you a sense for, and so these stories are attached to the time and place, okay? The other thing we can do is also go back to our original person and be able to look at all the different records across time and space that's related to that person. So you can imagine that this is the census record that's been record linked to a school record and record linked across census years and mapped to various maps. So if I were to choose a different year, we'll go to 1930, I'm going to get a different map and I'm going to get a different geography, right? So now this is her home here in 1930. All the demographic information for her gets updated, okay? And we can see now that she's a stenographer working for a copper mining company, and she's now 23 years old, okay? And if I go to people, places, and stories, again, I could see different relationships. The same ones as before, or anything else that's tied to this location in sort of the 1930 general area. Lots of other tools and possibilities here. People can share stories. They can share related stories to these individual records. You can change different kinds of maps and put on a satellite background, for example, and be able to see how things change through time by looking and zooming back and forth. There's lots of other utilities that are in here, but the thing that we wanted to kind of show you was the power of being able to have your data linked through space and time. And it's among the things that we're going to be showing you how to do throughout the Institute is how do you really do this, right? How do you link your sources together? How do you make sure that your map really is deep by allowing it to have depth in time and space, okay? So just wanted to give you a quick overview of that. And I'll turn it back over to Dan.
Okay, we're close to discussion time, but just to kind of wrap this up briefly, I hope that demonstration has kind of illustrated the things that I talked about earlier, and think about the relationship between your infrastructure and your actual deep map when you're looking at the technology that Don was demonstrating there, because all of the features are, the result of decisions we made to include certain types of data and spend the time, often substantial time, digitizing them, spatializing them, record linking them in such a way that they could tell these sorts of stories. And so in terms of best practices, these are things to think about while you're trying to meet the technical challenges that you face during every phase of building a deep map. Having both spatial and temporal depth is important. These aren't going to be maps about one moment in time or a very small space, even though they should be able to deal with those kinds of questions when you build them correctly. And so you're going to try to find the most appropriate cartography, and that's a really key step. And it's also a very challenging one because sometimes you just don't have the data you want to represent a particular time and space. And that could be very frustrating. And that's sometimes some of our favorite questions get left on the cutting room floor as a result of the necessity of working with data that you have that's appropriate. And so that's why the flexibility is really important, because if you're answering multiple questions, if you're able to think more broadly, you're not going to be limited as badly by gaps in the data. And another way to sort of eliminate or to deal with gaps in the data is having multiple sources. So one of the key things about the way that we have built deep maps is based on the idea that if you have several data sources about the same person or place or thing, the gaps in one particular data set are often going to be covered at least partially by another data set, or just as importantly, you're going to get conflicting stories that highlight the sort of uncertainty and fuzziness of studying the past using this kind of data. We're not trying to build a unitary narrative. It's going to be multivocal. It's often going to be in conflict. It's going to be highlighting or at least being transparent about, rather than concealing, the limitations or the uncertainties in the data. And that leads to some tough decisions because you may really want to show one thing or another thing, but you're trying to answer all of these general sort of best practices rather than just pick the sort of lowest hanging fruit, even though it might be problematic in certain ways. So being sort of realistic about what you can do, but also striving for that flexibility and breadth at the scoping scale. It can be difficult. But as we said here, to kind of wrap up in the best practices section, you do need to start with a narrow question, but you're thinking broadly as you're building that question. What are all the other questions that connect to that question that would result in this much broader, flexible way of looking at the past? And I think with that, we're going to kind of open it up for some Q&A before our discussion.
Nothing's in the chat so far, nor in the Q&A. If you guys do have questions, please drop them in here and I'll be able to read them out to Don and Dan here. Oh, great question from Angela Smith. So who is the target audience for the time traveler? It's a great question. Don, do you want to answer that?
Sure. The target audience for the time traveler itself, the target audience is really the general public, both residents, visitors, sort of our diaspora, people who we've lost a lot of population here over time, so people moved away. Not actually specifically sort of the academic and research community. That's more so the HSDI, but the time traveler itself is really the broad community.
Perfect. I hope that answered your question, Angela. If it doesn't, you can always send a follow-up. Anybody else? Looks like we have questions in the chat here. Gina Manders said, did you find the census data through the regular U.S. Census or through an ancestry site with question mark?
Yeah, so the census data we get from IPMS, which is at the Minnesota Population Center, and that's downloadable. The versions we use are what they refer to as a restricted data set, so it has the names of everyone, which we had to get permission to use from them, but we will be talking about accessing that data in a future, I think two workshops from now. get that data. But that comes from IPMS. And if you go on the Time Traveler's website, there's a link to sort of all the data sources and information about them. You can read about them there.
Yeah, and I would add just to what Don said that you know, that was one data set. Some of the data sets we used in the Time Traveler, we were able to simply acquire on our own or had in the archives. That was one where we worked fairly closely with IPMS for a while to get the big historical volume of data we needed and overcome some technical challenges. So sometimes you'll just be able to scrape data and use it. Sometimes you're going to end up having to develop a relationship with an archive or someone who built a data set or something like that to get what you need. So some stuff was off the shelf, some stuff required us to build from scratch. The IPMS was kind of in the middle. We got a big data set from them, but we had to do quite a bit of work with it to get it to interface with the software we were building.
Perfect. We'll jump to Jackie. She asked the next question, and she asked, "What software (parentheses) does the Time Traveler use? It looks like something more custom than a general story map."
Yep, the desktop version of the Time Traveler was custom built. It uses, we're going to talk about this in 2 weeks or 2 workshops from now in great detail as well. It uses an Esri GIS backbone for the power of the thing, which you all have access to within the Institute and beyond. But the actual front end is custom built. But you'll have access to it. Well, you already do. It's on GitHub, but we'll be showing you how to use it for yourself. The mobile version, which I didn't show you today, but I encourage you to play with on your phone, is built in-house as well, and you're going to have access to that as well to build out mobile versions for your projects as the Institute goes along.
Perfect. Louise asks, "Was it easy to engage the community in this project?" That's a really good question. Don, you could talk about initial outreach if you'd like, and engaging people from the very beginning with charrettes. I think that would be a great way to start.
Yeah. So like I mentioned briefly in the presentation, you know, we started off by really scoping the entire project with key stakeholders who either, you know, we're the data repositories, the archives, or we imagine to be some of the, you know, most frequent users of the final HSDI itself at the beginning. Then when we came to the realization that we wanted to build a deep map and make it really public facing, we then did another round of charrette, borrowing from urban planning. I'm an urban geographer by training, so taking it from sort of urban planning and saying, okay, let's get together and actually do some design charrettes. And we did design charrettes with libraries and schools and senior centers, and then we built mock-ups and brought them back and had people engage with it, and we got feedback. And we did that 3 times, Sarah, 4 times, I can't remember, 3 or 4 times. And we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth in order to get people, the communities, you know, real and the different stakeholders kind of ways that they wanted to engage with it. And that was version 1, which you can look at on the PowerPoint that we sent in advance on what version 1 looked like. And then the one I just showed you is version 2. And then we made the mobile version as version 3. So that was that process. And there's a lot more to it than that. And James, you know, we'll have other workshops, I guess. I just want to be sensitive to time. I want to get you guys into your groups. But there is a lot more of that about how that process works, and we'll be having explicit workshops on that. So.
Yeah. Similarly, Angela, you've got good questions here about what kind of usage numbers we have and public engagement success measurements. We'll have a whole workshop on this. I'm very passionate about this personally. This is my dissertation, which was just recently published, and I can tell you that we've designed a model to engage that we feel is really great public participatory model of engagement for deep mapping projects that's currently under review with the Annals of the American Association of Geographers, which has been great. And I can just give you an example. In July, just the month of July of 2023 alone, our social media outreach, where we work to share stories that members of the public have with us on the Time Traveler. We then share them through social media to celebrate the work that the citizen historians are doing and to honor the way in which they're engaging with their heritage. We ended up reaching almost 41,000 individuals on social media, which is great because the area that we have the Keweenaw Peninsula that this map the geography of this map, we have less people in the two counties that make up that peninsula than 40,000. I think we've got maybe 30,000 individuals here. We ended up with over 2,000, or we ended up with 200 returning users who came back, and we had 24 people contribute stories. And stories are the way in which people contribute their contribute to the data we have in the Time Traveler. Jim asked a question, or sorry, Jonathan asked that. How do users add to the data and narratives? We do that through this process that we call stories, where people can share audio, videos, photos, memories, anything that all of those types of things can be uploaded that they feel add to the history or they think are important contributions to the heritage of the area. And we've got well over 2,000 of those stories to date. Those stories then can be spatially linked to other information we have, demographic data or other stuff. And yeah, this is an ongoing long conversation, and I know we want to get into actual workshop stuff, but we could go from there.
So I think what we'll do is we'll keep a record of these other questions. Some of these you can probably ask in your breakout rooms or answer them one-on-one, or we'll come back to them at the end. But we do want to move along. So, James, you want to explain what we're going to do here?
Yeah, so what I'm going to do shortly here is open up a set of breakout rooms, and the breakout rooms have are for each one of the project teams that we have here. Once you go into your breakout room, if you give me 1 second here, our team of directors have developed scoping worksheets. I think some of you have already taken a look at these, and we'd like to give you the opportunity to go through these worksheets, take a look at the questions we have step by step. You should have found them in Slack. If you haven't found them in Slack, you can now see these worksheets here in the drive. I've got so much information here that there we go. They'll have to do it in 2 messages, 3 messages. Let's see. Wow, that's amazing. All right, I'll make sure I put these here as well. There we go. So all the way through Charleston. And let's see, going back, copy pasting. So we'd like you to go into these rooms, take a look at the questions we have for you here, and we really would like you to answer these questions with as much detail as you can. You know, like one of the questions we ask is basically, what kind of historic cartography do you plan on using in your deep map? And where is it located, and how far along is it processed? You know, is it sitting in an archive? Is it has it been digitized? Has it been geo-referenced? Where are you at in the process? And really listing out in detail all of the things you have access to. The more detail you add to this document, the more effort you put into scoping this now, the easier it is to have a framework to refer back to as we go through these modules and work our way to the in-person institute here in July. So it's really important to us that that we go through these and we critically reflect on these questions together. Each one of the institute directors will be bouncing back and forth between your rooms every 15 to 20 minutes. And if you have questions or concerns, you can bounce them off of one of us, and we'll do our best to answer them. Any questions about that?
And just make sure that you decide who's going to be your sort of record keeper, because there will be some prompts that we'll give you a little later on that we're going to ask you to kind of share with everybody. So when you get into your groups, please make sure you decide who's going to be your scribe. Okay.
Perfect. I'm going to open the rooms right now, and we'll leave you to it.